What avoidants secretly feel during no contact, but will never admit. You think they don't care, don't you? That silence means you are forgettable. But here's the truth. Avoidance doesn't erase emotion, it hides it. And while you've been counting the days since you last spoke, they've been fighting a quiet war inside their head that they'll never let you see. Today, we're going to peel back that mask and look at what really happens inside an avoidant's mind during no contact. When you go no contact with an avoidant, it looks like they've won. They seem calm, detached, almost relieved, but that's surface level behavior, not emotional reality. Avoidants are experts at suppressing what they feel. They protect their independence, like it's oxygen, but deep down, that silence you think they're comfortable in. It's the silence that actually exposes them. Let's break down what's really happening underneath that cool exterior. At first, when an avoidant person experiences no contact, there's a deep exhale of relief. It's not that they're celebrating your absence, but the emotional space feels like safety to them. In their world, closeness often equals pressure, and emotional intimacy can feel like suffocation. So when communication stops, the first wave they feel isn't sadness, it's freedom. They interpret the quiet as control regained, as if the tension that once tied them to emotional responsibility has finally loosened. To them, peace and distance look the same. That sense of relief, however, is deceptive. It's not the calm of contentment, it's the calm of avoidance. Avoidants crave emotional independence so fiercely that they often mistake disconnection for strength. They tell themselves that stepping back means they're being rational, mature, or self-sufficient. But beneath that reasoning sits a subtle truth. They're not at peace. They're simply avoiding discomfort. The lack of contact feels good at first because it removes the mirror. They don't have to see how much they care, how uncertain they feel, or how afraid they are of losing control in love. When you were around, every conversation, every text, every sign of affection carried a risk. The risk of being needed, or worse, of needing you back. That's what truly unsettles them. Dependence. For an avoidant, dependence feels like weakness and vulnerability feels like exposure. So when no contact begins, they get to step away from the intensity that intimacy brings. It's like turning down the volume on emotions they were never taught to sit with. They tell themselves, this is better, this is how it should be. But that relief they feel is not sustainable. It's not grounded in healing or clarity. It's grounded in avoidance. The silence that once felt like power slowly turns into isolation. The absence that gave them control starts to highlight what they've lost, yet they can't admit that to themselves. Not yet. To admit that would mean acknowledging that the connection affected them more than they wanted to believe. And that thought threatens the very foundation of their emotional defenses. So in the early stages of no contact, an avoidant lives in this illusion of emotional victory. They feel like they've regained control of their narrative, that they've restored balance. But the truth is, they're controlling the surface of the ocean while ignoring the storm building underneath. The relief they feel is only possible because they've shut down the part of themselves that longs, the part that cares, the part that once reached for you. They've numbed it, not healed it. If you could see inside their mind during that first phase, you'd notice how hard they work to rationalize their emotions. They tell themselves stories like, I needed space, or it was too intense, or it's better this way. And maybe for a while those stories keep them steady. But the relief isn't about being done with you. It's about avoiding the version of themselves that feels unsafe in closeness. They're not escaping you. They're escaping what you made them feel. And that, more than anything, is what gives their silence its edge. After the initial wave of relief begins to fade, confusion quietly takes its place. The avoidant, who once felt certain that distance was the right choice, begins to sense something they can't easily name. It's not regret, not yet, and it's not exactly sadness either. It's a soft, uncomfortable awareness that something feels missing. The problem is they don't have the language to describe it, because acknowledging that absence would mean admitting that you mattered more than they allowed themselves to believe. Avoidants are not emotionless. They are simply disconnected from their emotional vocabulary. When they start to feel that strange emptiness during no contact, their mind scrambles to make sense of it. Instead of saying, I miss them, they reframe it as curiosity. I just wonder what they're doing, they tell themselves, as if that thought is neutral. They convince themselves they're not longing, just checking in mentally. They might scroll through old messages, reread a conversation, or glance at your social media, all under the pretense of harmless curiosity. But every glance is an attempt to soothe an emotion they refuse to name. This confusion grows because they were never comfortable being emotionally dependent on anyone. To miss you means to need you. To need you means to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable means to risk rejection or loss again. So instead of sitting in that feeling, they intellectualize it. They look for logical explanations for their discomfort. Maybe I'm just bored, or it's just habit, or I'm only thinking about them because I have free time. It's easier to explain emotion away than to experience it. Underneath that rationalization, though, is a growing restlessness. They may notice moments when you come to mind for no reason, while driving, before sleeping, when they see something that reminds them of you. Each time, they try to shut it down, to reassert their emotional independence. But emotions don't follow logic. They surface in the spaces where denial starts to thin. The more they try to convince themselves they're fine, the more intrusive the thoughts become. This inner confusion creates tension that others rarely see. Outwardly, they seem composed, calm, maybe even indifferent. But inside, they're in quiet conflict. One part of them wants to reach out just to relieve the uncertainty, while the other part refuses, terrified of losing the sense of control they've worked so hard to maintain. They may draft messages and delete them. They may hover over your name in their contacts, tempted but too proud to act. It's not because they don't care. It's because caring feels unsafe. That's the irony of their confusion. They feel something real, yet they can't let themselves feel it openly, so they rename it, distort it, or bury it under logic. The heart says, I miss them. The mind replies, no, you're just being weak. This internal dialogue keeps looping, keeping them emotionally stuck. The more they fight it, the more tangled their feelings become. What started as curiosity slowly turns into longing disguised as logic, a quiet ache they'll never admit to anyone, not even themselves. Inside the mind of an avoidant during no contact, a silent battle begins to unfold. It's not dramatic or visible to anyone else, but it's powerful enough to keep them awake at night. This battle is between their ego and their emotion, between the part of them that craves control and the part that craves connection. On one side stands the voice that insists, I don't need them. I'm fine on my own. On the other side whispers something softer, something dangerous to their pride. Why haven't they reached out? Do they even think about me? These two forces pull in opposite directions and neither wins completely. Avoidants have built much of their emotional identity around self-sufficiency. They pride themselves on not being dependent, not being the one who needs reassurance or affection to feel grounded. So when they start to feel the sting of your absence, it collides directly with the image they've worked so hard to maintain. Their ego steps in quickly to protect that image. It tells them stories, convincing, logical stories about why they're better off without you, why the distance was necessary, why closeness only caused problems. Yet beneath that logic, their emotions keep whispering truths that are harder to ignore. There are moments when they catch themselves thinking about you unexpectedly. Maybe it's a memory, a phrase you used to say, or a song that reminds them of you. When those moments hit, their heart stirs with something tender, something that feels like missing you. But before that feeling can fully form, the ego shuts it down. It rationalizes, criticizes, distracts. It doesn't mean anything. It says, you're just nostalgic. The ego tries to win by diminishing the emotion, pretending it's temporary or insignificant. The avoidant convinces themselves that what they feel is under control, even as that quiet longing begins to take root. This back and forth can be exhausting. One moment they feel empowered by their independence, the next they feel a dull ache they can't shake. They replay old interactions looking for proof that they were right to pull away. But with every replay, something inside them softens instead of hardens. The emotion they're trying to suppress starts leaking through the cracks in their logic. They may tell themselves they just want closure or that they're simply reflecting, but what they're really doing is missing you in a way that challenges their sense of control. That's the cruel irony of being avoidant. The very control they seek ends up controlling them. The harder they fight their emotions, the louder those emotions become. Pride tells them to stay silent. Loneliness tells them to reach out. Fear tells them they'll lose themselves in love again. Hope tells them they might find something real if they let their guard down. This inner conflict doesn't make them cold. It makes them human in denial. The ego and the heart wrestle endlessly. And while they may never admit it out loud, that war between strength and softness becomes the quiet soundtrack of their silence. As time goes on and the silence stretches, the avoidant begins to replay the last moments with you in their mind. It starts subtly. One memory triggers another, and before they realize it, they're running through entire scenes like a private movie reel. The human mind tends to revisit what's unresolved, and for an avoidant, relationships often end without full closure because genuine emotional confrontation feels unbearable. So instead of reaching out or facing those feelings head on, they turn inward, analyzing and dissecting every small detail. They replay the last argument, the last message, the last glance you gave them, trying to make sense of what happened while maintaining the illusion that they're emotionally detached. Each replay serves a hidden purpose. They tell themselves they're simply checking that they made the right decision, that they're evaluating things logically. But the truth is, this rumination is an emotional coping mechanism in disguise. They're trying to soothe the uncertainty left behind by your absence. When you were around, even conflict provided a kind of emotional connection. It was proof that there was still something alive between you. Now that the connection is gone, they use memory to recreate that sense of contact without admitting it to themselves. It's safer to think about you than to feel the emptiness of losing you. In these mental reruns, the avoidant often takes on the role of both actor and judge. They analyze their own behavior, sometimes justifying it, sometimes criticizing it. One moment they think, I had to pull away, it was too much. And the next they wonder, did I overreact? Was I too cold? This internal debate can linger for weeks or months. It's not that they suddenly want to reopen the relationship, it's that they can't fully close it within themselves. Emotionally, they're still tethered to what happened, but their pride won't let them acknowledge it. As longing, replaying moments also gives them a sense of control. For an avoidant, control is safety. They fear emotional unpredictability more than loneliness. By mentally revisiting the past, they feel like they're holding the narrative in their hands. They can pause, rewind, and edit in a way real life never allowed. But what they don't realize is that this need for control is keeping them stuck in the very emotional loop they're trying to escape. The more they revisit the story, the more emotionally invested they remain in it, even if they claim otherwise. Over time, the tone of these memories can shift. What started as justification may turn into nostalgia. They might remember something simple, a shared laugh, the way you looked at them, the comfort of being understood, and for a moment, their guard lowers. Then, almost instantly, they pull back from that thought, as if catching themselves doing something dangerous. They remind themselves why they left or why distance is better. But beneath all that reasoning, there's a quiet ache that lingers after every mental replay, a trace of emotion they can't fully erase, no matter how many times they rewrite the ending in their mind. As the days of no contact stretch longer, a subtle fear begins to creep in for the avoidant, one that they'll never admit, even to themselves. It's the fear of being forgotten. At first, they convinced themselves that the distance didn't matter, that space was what they needed, that emotional detachment was strength. But after the initial relief fades and the confusion settles, something shifts. They begin to wonder whether you still think about them at all. It's not always a conscious thought. It surfaces quietly in fleeting moments, like when they scroll through their phone and see something that reminds them of you. They pause, hesitate, and then quickly move on, pretending it meant nothing. But deep down, there's a flicker of unease, a question they can't silence. What if you've already moved on? Avoidants are experts at maintaining emotional distance because it helps them feel safe. They tell themselves they don't need reassurance or validation. Yet, the longer no contact goes on, the more they start craving the very things they've rejected. They don't necessarily want to talk or reconnect, but they want to know they still hold space in your mind. They want to feel significant without having to be vulnerable. It's a paradox. They want to be remembered but not pursued, missed but not needed, valued but not relied upon. This need to feel seen without exposure is what keeps them quietly orbiting your memory. Even as they pretend to have moved on, that fear of being forgotten grows heavier the moment they realize the silence isn't just temporary. It's real. At first, they might have expected you to reach out, to send a message, to check in. They may have even counted on it, subconsciously believing that you wouldn't be able to handle the distance. But when that message never comes, it unsettles them. It challenges the story they tell themselves about being in control. The longer the silence lasts, the more they start to question whether their detachment cost them more than they anticipated. They might try to test the waters in small, indirect ways, liking an old photo, asking mutual friends how you're doing, or even posting something they think might get your attention. Each action is calculated, not impulsive. They'll never admit that it comes from fear. To them, it's just curiosity, coincidence, or just checking. But underneath that calm exterior, what's really driving these little gestures is a quiet panic that you might have finally stopped caring. For an avoidant, being forgotten feels like erasure. It's not just losing a person, it's losing a reflection of their significance. They may not want emotional closeness, but they want emotional relevance. They need to know that, even in their absence, they still matter. And when that reassurance doesn't come, it stirs something uncomfortable, an emptiness they can't reason away. It's the moment when their silence starts to echo back at them, and they realize that no contact doesn't just protect them from pain. It also isolates them from the validation they secretly crave. Eventually, when the silence has stretched too long and the illusion of control begins to crumble, regret starts to creep in for the avoidant. It doesn't arrive dramatically. There's no sudden revelation or overwhelming rush of emotion. Instead, it seeps in quietly, often when they least expect it, late at night during a mundane task, or when they stumble across something that reminds them of you. At first, they brush it off. They tell themselves it's just nostalgia or habit. But slowly, that whisper of doubt becomes louder. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I didn't have to let it end like that. For an avoidant, regret is complicated because it collides directly with their pride. They've spent so long convincing themselves that pulling away was the right thing to do, that their need for space was justified, that detachment was a form of self-protection. To admit regret would mean admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability for them feels like exposure, so they don't name it regret. They call it reflection, rationalization, or closure. They reframe it in ways that protect their ego, even while their heart aches in silence. The first signs of regret often come as subtle emotional echoes rather than conscious thoughts. They might suddenly remember the sound of your laugh or a small moment of kindness they took for granted. They might think about how you made them feel seen in ways others didn't. These memories stir something deep inside them, a mixture of warmth and discomfort. They realize, perhaps too late, that the emotional safety they ran from was also the very thing they craved. But instead of reaching out, they retreat into their own thoughts, analyzing and suppressing until the feeling dulls again. There's also a painful irony in this stage. Avoidants often convince themselves that they need to distance themselves to feel free. But when freedom finally arrives, it feels empty. The solitude they once celebrated starts to feel hollow without the emotional anchor that you provided. They begin to see the difference between peace and loneliness. Peace is calm and complete. Loneliness is quiet and cold. For the first time, they start to understand that their avoidance didn't protect them from pain. It just delayed it. Still, even as regret deepens, action rarely follows. Pride builds a wall that's almost impossible for them to climb over. They fear rejection more than they miss connection. They imagine what it would feel like to reach out and be met with silence, and that fear keeps them frozen. So they stay where they are, haunted by memories, trapped by pride, and comforted only by the illusion of control. In the end, regret for an avoidant isn't always about losing you. It's about realizing what they lost within themselves by running. They start to see how fear shaped their choices, how distance cost them depth, and how silence became a prison disguised as safety. It's a quiet pain, invisible to the world, but it lingers long after you've stopped thinking about them. And though they'll never admit it, a part of them will always wonder what might have happened if they just allowed themselves to stay. When you step back and look at what happens inside an avoidant during no contact, you start to see the truth that they'll never show on the surface. They're not made of stone. They feel deeply, just differently. The silence that looks like strength is often just fear in disguise. They tell themselves they're protecting their peace when really they're protecting their heart from being seen. Every phase they go through, the relief, the confusion, the ego battles, the replaying of moments, the fear of being forgotten, and finally, the quiet regret reveals that even distance doesn't erase emotional connection. It only buries it. But the beauty of no contact isn't about proving a point to them. It's about finding your own peace again. It's realizing that you don't have to chase someone to be chosen. You don't have to prove your worth to someone who's still at war with their own emotions. Your silence is not a punishment. It's self-respect. It's the moment you decide that your healing is more important than being understood by someone who isn't ready to understand themselves. And maybe one day they'll look back and see what they lost. Maybe they'll finally recognize that love doesn't have to mean losing freedom, that closeness doesn't have to mean suffocation, but by then you'll have already moved forward, stronger, softer, and more self-assured than before, because while they were running from connection, you were learning how to connect with yourself. So if you're in no contact right now, don't measure its success by whether they come back, measure it by how much you've reclaimed your peace. The goal was never to make them chase you. It was to remind yourself that you are worth staying for. Thank you for listening and for choosing to understand instead of just react. Thank you for giving yourself permission to see the truth without bitterness. Remember, love doesn't fail just because someone couldn't meet you there. It simply redirects you towards someone who will. Take this time to heal, to grow, and to trust that real connection doesn't require you to shrink. Keep your heart open, but protect it with wisdom. You deserve a love that doesn't run at the sight of depth, a love that meets you where you are and stays. Thank you for being here today, for sharing this space, and for valuing your own worth enough to listen. Take care of your heart, be gentle with yourself, and until next time, choose peace over pursuit, growth over guessing, and love that feels like home.